Hi, everyone. Welcome to our lecture night tonight. My name is Elisa Grishman. I am a fat white woman with brown curly hair, wearing a black t-shirt that says Access Mob Pittsburgh, and I am sitting in a blue power wheelchair. Thank you all for coming to our community lecture night tonight. Um, I'm the founder and director of Access Mob Pittsburgh, which is a disability rights group focused on issues here in Pittsburgh, PA. Before we begin, I just want to take a second to thank a number of people. Right off the bat, my board, Debbie, Donna, Kendra, Monica, and Nyota. Our tech people tonight, we have Dean and Sean here in the room, and Katie in Zoom land. For people who are here, we have to thank Clean Air Tools Pittsburgh for providing air filtration to the room for COVID and flu precautions. Want to thank our fiscal agent, Disability Pride PA, for taking us on as a project. And a huge thank you to the Three Rivers Community Foundation, whose generous grant is making this night possible. Closed captions are available, and there's a link to the transcript that will be in the chat. Please remain muted and turn your cameras off. So if you are here in person, please, mute your cell phones, put it on vibrate. In Zoom, stay muted unless you are specifically called on. You may message Access Mob's, I can say my own organization name. You may message Access Mob Pittsburgh facilitator in the chat if you have a question or problem, and they will get back to you. For people who are here in person, the emergency exits are, on either side to my left, to your right if you're in the audience. There is an elevator directly across. If you are in a wheelchair and there's an emergency, wait at the top of the elevator and someone will come and get us. There is also bathrooms out the door to the left and way at the end of the hallway to the left. Yes, this is being recorded. If you do not want to be recorded and you are in the room, just sit back behind the camera. Anyone who is out there on Zoom who doesn't want to be in the recording, just don't show your face if you have to ask a question, and that will be fine. You are welcome to sit, stand, lie down, sit in a chair, sit on the floor, whatever makes you comfortable. We understand that a lot of people have a lot of different needs in terms of paying attention, being comfortable. We totally understand that. Q&A. If there is time for a Q&A at the end, please raise your hand with the virtual reaction or let the facilitator know if there's a problem and wait to be called on. You will be asked to unmute and/or turn on your camera. You may ask your question verbally or in ASL, or type questions in the chat for Access Mob to read out loud. You do not have to turn on your camera unless you need to speak ASL. For people who are in the room, please only talk if you have a microphone that I can bring around. The Zoom chat, again, is turned off for everything except to contact the facilitator just to make this more accessible to everyone. And if you are on your phone, to raise your hand, you can hit *9. And if you need to mute or unmute, it's *6. If we don't have time for questions, or if you have questions after the fact, if you're listening to this recording later on YouTube, please email your questions to accessmobpittsburgh, AccessMobPittsburgh @gmail.com. After this lecture, there will be a survey that's going to go out either tonight or tomorrow. We ask that you please fill this out. Just it helps us learn to run our events better. And, if you have ideas for things that you want to see in the future, you can include that in there, and we will do our best to make those nights happen. There'll be more information at the end if anyone feels like donating to us. but we run on donations and grant funding. We are a 501c3 organization. So just please consider, you can go to accessmobpittsburgh.org/donate. There'll be more information about this at the end. And a quick plug, just 5 seconds. Earlier this week, it was announced in Pittsburgh that we are hitting a funding crisis for our transit system. We're doing a lot of work. A huge number of people with disabilities rely on public transit, especially the paratransit services will be cut down to 62% in the region to bare minimum required by the ADA. We're partnered with a number of organizations that are trying to help fight this. If you have a minute, please just go to transitforallpa.org. I forgot what's the front slash take action. So that's transitforallpa.org/take action. That will be in the chat as well. If you have 5 seconds, there's a way to just contact your Congress people and help get us funding. On to the good stuff for tonight. So the City of Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations is the top investigative body for civil rights in the City of Pittsburgh. Their mission is to enforce local, state, and federal anti-discrimination laws. Their jurisdiction extends to areas of employment, housing, and public access and accommodation. They also work towards outreach and public education. Tonight, they will be giving a brief history of their organization, along with an overview of their current work, especially as it pertains to the disability community. They also want to hear from participants about what issues they can help with. Our speaker is Rachel Shepard, she, her pronouns. I didn't say I use she, her pronouns. But Rachel Shepard is the executive director of the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations, the city's civil rights enforcement agency. Rachel is a third-generation City of Pittsburgh employee committed to serving the community. Charged with enforcing the rights of marginalized community members, she strives to empower individuals to assert their rights under the law, dismantle discriminatory practices, and foster a more inclusive and equitable society. By leveraging partnerships and collaboration within the community, she envisions a future where every individual will be afforded dignity, respect, and equal opportunity. Rachel has a degree in psychology, a background as a paralegal, and since 2016 has held multiple positions within the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations. Without further ado, Rachel Shepard.
Thank you, Elisa. Just to get started, again, Rachel Shepard. I do use she, her pronouns. I am a 37-year-old white woman with dark brown hair that's currently pulled up in a ponytail. I have a burnt orange sweater on that I like to roll up to my elbows. That's just a thing I do all the time. And if you see me fiddling with my fingers at all, anyone that's watching, I have some anxiety, so that comes through a lot when I public speak. So if you see me moving around and like shoving my hands in my pockets, that is probably why. But thank you all for taking the time to come out or to be present on Zoom tonight. I know that everybody's time is valuable and there's lots to be done all the time. What is the Commission on Human Relations? This is an agency that I've been with now for almost a decade. I started as a secretary and I'm now the executive director. That sounds like a wild story. It was just a lot of really good timing and passion for moving things forward. But the Commission is a 70-year-old organization dedicated to enforcing civil rights protections in Pittsburgh. In addition to the enforcement that we do, which is the primary goal of the Commission, is to enforce the civil rights laws, we do other things like conduct outreach. We make connections and collaborate with other departments and organizations. We like to go out and educate. This is a great opportunity. I really thank the Access Mob for inviting me. And we maintain our independence. So the Commission is an agency that is quasi-governmental. We are a part of the City of Pittsburgh government in that our salaries are funded by the city, but we are independent in that we can take cases against the City of Pittsburgh government. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we move. So this slide covers what laws the commission enforces. And so this list encompasses the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as amended, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act of 2008. Sorry, I always forget an A in there. The Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967, the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act of 2023, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, also as amended in 1988, and most importantly, the Pittsburgh City Code, Article 5, Sections 651 through 659. And if there's anything that I am well versed in, it is that section of City Code. I will speak today about a lot of different things that come before the commission that are disability related. I'll give some definitions, but I will never pretend that I am the expert on all things disability. And I defer to you all. Please correct me if I've said anything incorrect. I want to make sure that everyone knows that we as the commission are available as a resource to you, as a way to advocate for yourself. But I will not be the one to tell you what things make a good accommodation or modification, etc. So the two things that are on this list of laws that we enforce that are not covered by the commission are the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act and the Equal Pay Act of 1963. And so the PHRA is covered by the Pennsylvania Commission on Human Relations. They do the same thing we do. They have the entirety of the state of Pennsylvania to investigate discrimination complaints, and that is their governing code. Until when and if we have a work sharing agreement with the state commission, we will not be representing the PHRA. And then likewise with the Equal Pay Act, that is something that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission enforces, and that they ask it that we direct those cases directly to them so that they can investigate. So in terms of who works for the commission, I mentioned that we're independent. We are independent because we are set up differently than the other boards, authorities, and commissions. Our board is made up of 15 community members. They have to live in the city of Pittsburgh, but they are appointed by our mayor and then confirmed by city council. And this often entails an interview by city council to ensure that they're fit for the position. We like to do outreach ahead of time to our commissioners to ensure that everyone knows exactly what they're getting themselves into. It is more than a meeting a month. We actually had a letter from back when I began with the commission that was included in the orientation packet that was entitled just that. And so these commissioners serve 4-year terms until they, sometimes we have people that have to remove themselves, or they get removed by us if they are not participating, or they're replaced once they hit the end of their term, and they can resign as things come up and they have other obligations. Many of our commissioners are very, very busy people, and they just, sometimes the commission and the efforts that we have are just a bit too much. So we have a bifurcated board. The 15 commissioners that we have are very important because 7 of them will sit on our compliance review section and hear cases every month from our investigators. It's important for us to be able to keep business moving, that they show up to those meetings and hear those cases, and they are very well trained in how to evaluate what's being presented to them. And likewise, the other half of our commission is the public hearing section. Their job is to form a panel if we have a case that goes probable cause. If we have enough information to say that discrimination occurred, it's going to go probable cause. And if we can't settle that case, it will go to public hearing, and that panel will hear the case brand new, testimony, witnesses, discovery, all of it. And they have to make a decision and write an order. We are lucky as a commission. We are one of the few across the nation that has enforcement power. We can take cases to court. We can enforce settlement agreements in court, and we can enforce our orders in court. Many other commissions make recommendations, and that's as far as it goes. So we don't take it lightly that we are an enforcement agency and that we are here to enforce those laws. So in addition to those monthly meetings I mentioned, our commissioners are on committees. They serve on at outreach events when we do tabling, or they make presentations to the community. They can sit on topic-specific public hearings where we collect testimony from the community. They do all sorts of things, and we are very thankful to have them. Now, if you are a City of Pittsburgh resident and would be interested in becoming a commissioner, I have information on the very last slide of the presentation that has the commissioner fact sheet, which we use to share with people what exactly they need to do as a commissioner, and the application link for the boards, authorities, and commissions of the city. In terms of who works for the commission, we are a small but mighty staff. We have 8 people. So on the screen, for anyone who is unable to see that, it's an organizational chart that shows at the very top our commissioners. A step down is the director, so myself. We have a deputy director and 4 investigators that he oversees for cases. And we have an administrative assistant who does all of our in and out for cases, any of the material communications that we have to make. And he also sits on our LGBTQIA+ commission. And our fiscal and contracting coordinator, who is essentially my right hand, and I couldn't live without her. So I hope she's not watching this. So the commission I mentioned does outreach and education. Obviously, I'm here right now. This is what I like to do. I like to be able to get up and get ahead of any potential issues, reach people before there's a problem. We talk to employers, we talk to housing providers, and we really just want to make sure that everyone knows what their rights and responsibilities are under the law. And so we also address those issues because we know that people who know better do better. Lots of folks that come before us for discrimination complaints are not doing things intentionally. It's just ignorance. Unfortunately, when we're looking for probable cause, it's not based on intent. We're looking at the facts. And so the commission also has the power, because of the Home Rule Charter, to amend legislation. So we have the power to add our own protections based on what's going on in Pittsburgh at the time. And we can also review legislation of other departments to ensure that there's an anti-discrimination lens applied to them. We want to make sure that everyone is thinking about these things before they're made into law and not after. We do conduct research. It is difficult because it requires a large amount of funding, and we don't have that on any given in any given year. But we did just complete an LGBTQIA+ housing research study, which we will be putting the report out for shortly, and doing some outreach events around that. We wanted to explore the landscape of housing in the city of Pittsburgh for our LGBT community. We've had sexual orientation as a protection since 1990, gender identity and expression since 2014, but we rarely see those protections with a complaint that's filed before our office, and we wanted to know more about why. And so we can also do those topic-specific public hearings to cover specific topics. The last one we did was back in 2017. It was on religious and ethnic intimidation in the city of Pittsburgh. And what we do is we collect testimony at those to better inform our processes and to add protections if we need to. So enforcement is our bread and butter. That is what we do on a daily basis. That is our investigator's entire job. It is our deputy director. He supervises those cases. And so we investigate complaints of discrimination. That is our main function. So anyone who lives in well, I'll cover that in a minute. But we can also create commission-initiated complaints. So if there's a group of people who are being harmed, by some kind of discriminatory action and they're unwilling to come forward or unable to come forward for a multitude of reasons, we can create a commission-initiated complaint so that we can evaluate what's going on our own volition, and we don't need specific input from any one person. We don't have to divulge that person's information if they're at risk. And so we also have the because we're an enforcement agency, we have the ability to issue subpoenas. That can be very handy, particularly during our public hearings where we need to compel people to attend and provide testimony, or if we need them to produce documents. We don't want to have to send a subpoena, but we will if we have to. Always carrot before the stick. And so one of my main functions is to also monitor our settlement agreements. The commission is very big on trying to resolve discrimination issues. We don't want to have anything linger or go to court if it doesn't have to. We would rather sit down, have one of our mediators try to resolve a case so that the people who were harmed can walk away and feeling like they've been made whole and they can move forward. And so whoever committed the discriminatory act can learn how to do better and maybe get some training out of it, maybe apply some new policies. And so we at the commission will monitor those to make sure that everything is falling into place as it should. So now we have the requirements for filing a discrimination complaint with the commission. It does have to be based on a protected class, and we do have those listed on our next slide, but this one will cover what categories can be covered. The commission covers the areas of employment, housing, public accommodations, and the delivery of city services, which we refer to as just civil rights within the city code. And that civil rights protection covers any employees of the city of Pittsburgh who are acting as an employee of the city of Pittsburgh who maybe discriminate against a member of the public in their providing of services. This does include the Pittsburgh Police. And we like to make people aware of that because it's just one of those lesser known protections. Again, we're not trying to stir up trouble or punish anybody. That's not the goal. The goal is just how do we move forward from this and do better. And so where the harm had to occur is somewhere within the city of Pittsburgh limits. Anywhere in the municipality of Pittsburgh, that's where the harm had to occur. You don't have to live here. You don't have to, you don't have to be a resident. You don't have to be a citizen, but you do have to have experienced the harm within the city limits. So we always encourage people, please check the address of, your employer or your housing to make sure that it does fall within the Pittsburgh municipality, because all too many of them fall just outside of the city limits. And then that's not something that we can take. And we have a time frame for filing that is up to 365 days. So anyone who might be familiar with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they have a 180-day time frame for filing discrimination complaints. We in the city of Pittsburgh have 365 days, which does extend the time frame quite a bit, right? Doubles it. And this can include ongoing harm. We always say if you're a person who has been in an unfortunate situation involving harassment for years and you're finally just over it and you want to take action, all of that time is covered as long as the most recent event was within the last 365 days. And then when it comes to who may file, we see mostly individual complaints. Any individual person can come and file. You can file for yourself or on behalf of someone else if they're unwilling to come forward or unable to come forward. I mentioned that the commission can do commission-initiated complaints. And we also see organizational complaints. So if you are a part of an organization whose part of your mission is to combat discrimination, and your mission has been frustrated by some action of an employer or a housing provider or public service, you can bring that complaint to the commission and we can investigate it. So I mentioned the protected classes. The discrimination has to be based on your membership in a protected class. And these are parts of yourself that you cannot change. We are all members of protected classes. I tell everybody that I see, this is not meant for just minority people. This is meant for everyone. So from the top, we've got age over 40, which is an employment specific protection, ancestry, color, disability, sex, gender expression, gender identity, hair texture and style, and this also includes head coverings, medical marijuana patients, which is also employment specific, national origin, place of birth, pregnancy, and in Pittsburgh, we also cover partners of pregnant people, race, religion, genetic information, sexual orientation, survivors of domestic violence, and retaliation. And so many of these are Pittsburgh specific protections. As I mentioned, we have the ability to add things as they come up. If we're seeing a particularly marginalized group within Pittsburgh, we can move to add that protection. So the ones that we cover under Pittsburgh are ancestry and place of birth, the partners of pregnant people, gender expression and identity, hairstyle and texture, medical marijuana patients, sexual orientation, and survivors of domestic violence. I'm particularly happy about the last protection that I mentioned, the domestic violence survivors. That is unique to Pittsburgh in a lot of ways because we have that protection in both housing and the employment space. And so just to recap, we do have that power to add protections based on the social and cultural climate of Pittsburgh. This slide does list all those protections that I just noted as being Pittsburgh specific. But it also notes that we're working on 2 specific protections right now, looking to get these added to city code. We are looking at adding criminal history, particularly in housing, because we believe that there should be no blanket policy against people who have some sort of criminal history, saying that a person who has any kind of arrest on their record within the last 100 years is not tenable. We want them to do individualized assessments. Consider the person, consider the situation. What about this person's criminal record makes them unfit to be a tenant? And the other one that we're working on pretty heavily is housing status. This one is meant mostly for those who are unhoused. If you're a person who's unhoused or has been unhoused at some point in your history and is being turned away from housing on the basis of just having been unhoused and no other real reason, no other potential risk, we find that to be discriminatory. This was already added in Washington, D.C. and a few other locations. And so we are looking to hopefully have this one passed by the end of 2025. I'm going to pause for a minute for questions. I did fail to mention that I would pause for questions after certain slides, but I think maybe chunk by chunk might be better. I just want to make sure. Okay. So we'll move into employment discrimination. The biggest thing that we see is disparate treatment. And that's exactly what it sounds like, just being treated differently based on your status as a person in a protected class. We see a failure to hire, promote, train. We see discipline and termination all too often. A failure to provide an accommodation for a disability, pregnancy, or a related medical condition, domestic violence, or for a religious reason. There are a number of different things that can require accommodation. And harassment and hostile work environment, which unfortunately at the court level can be very difficult to prove, but we have less of that burden at the administrative level that the commission covers. And the other piece of employment discrimination is also disparate impact. I like to touch on that because it's more of a policy or practice that seems neutral, seems like it's okay until you look at what the impact of it actually is. And so we look at things like having a flexible work schedule, whether you'll allow that or not for someone who's in a domestic violence situation. That lack of keeping a flexible work schedule can impact that survivor in a way that could be detrimental to their well-being. And then in housing discrimination, we're looking at things like advertising. If you're making, printing, publishing any kind of discriminatory material, if you're showing a preference or a disregard for a certain protected status of people, that's a violation. A refusal to rent or sell, or a refusal to negotiate with someone to rent or sell because of their protected status. Using different qualification criteria. This can be both in the rental or the sale space. That can often look like something as simple as a credit score. Denying that housing's available or making it unavailable. We talk about this one with maybe there's an ad on Craigslist and you call to respond. And then they hear you on the other end and maybe you have an accent. And then all of a sudden, oh, I'm sorry, I just rented it. And the ad stays up for another month. That could be a potentially discriminatory matter. Providing different services, facilities, terms, conditions, or privileges of housing is the biggest violation that we see because it encompasses so much. But this includes things like reasonable accommodations or modification requests, maintenance. A lot of people will look to the failure or a delay with their maintenance requests as a potential discriminatory issue. There's a lot of different ways that you can tell, but I always tell folks just trust your gut. If you feel like something's going on, it's better to call and ask. And then the most horrifying one is the harassment, including sexual harassment. Unfortunately, the commission, when it goes and does outreach to the college age students, many girls will come up to me and say, my landlord's been sending me some text messages that I don't like, and they're about my rent and things that I can do to make my rent cheaper. These things are still happening. It has not gone away. An area that folks with disabilities might be impacted a lot more often is the public accommodation space. And this encompasses a lot of different types of services, right? If you're being refused or denied services or facilities because of a disability, that's discriminatory. This can include something as simple as a convenience store whose aisles are not wide enough for you to enter. The publishing or posting, displaying any kind of advertisement, again, showing a bias towards or against a particular class of people. If you participate in a discriminatory issue, so we call that aiding, inciting, compelling, or coercing any unlawful public accommodations issue. So if there's a person in the gas station who is telling you to get out because you are using a walker and they just don't want to stand behind you in line, and the person behind the counter decides that they're going to enforce that, that's participation in a discriminatory act. And then discriminating against any person because the individual has opposed some kind of discrimination. If that same scenario happens and there's another person back behind the counter that says, no, ma'am, we're not going to do that. We're not going to kick this person out for no reason, then they are they could actually be experiencing some employment discrimination for participating in trying to stop a discriminatory act. I mentioned that it's also very important to cover our civil rights protections, the delivery of city services, because it's discrimination in treatment by any City of Pittsburgh employee while they are on the clock. You'd think that it's common knowledge to act in a respectful manner when you're dealing with the public, to not use things like slurs when you're interacting with the public, to be accommodating, but that's not always the case. And so if that is something that someone experiences, we used to use the examples of trash collection or recycling. If you feel like maybe your section of town is not being serviced as well with the environmental services team because you're mostly people of color. That's a really outdated example, unfortunately, but it could still happen. And so we talked about how this also covers the Pittsburgh police. There are a number of different ways to report misbehavior by a City of Pittsburgh police officer. Anyone familiar with the Office of Municipal Investigations? They take cases and will do investigations on improper procedure or practice. Did they follow the policy? Did they do what they were supposed to do? There's the Citizen Police Review Board, where you think primarily probably about police brutality, anything where they acted in a particularly violent or aggressive manner. And that's where you'd go for that. They do investigations as well. We specifically are covering discriminatory acts by police officers. So anything involving interactions with the police, interviews, pat downs, searches, detentions, if they're treating you differently because of your protected class status, that is going to be considered city service discrimination. Yes.
So we had a question message to us just regarding public accommodations. What about the places that only have step-free entry around the back in the alley next to the trash?
Yeah, this is becoming more and more common with people just knowing how to stand up for themselves and not take, curbside service when they don't have to, and not wanting to have to go to the back of a space. Unfortunately, the business rule is that if there is an accessible entrance of some kind for that business, then they're in the clear. They only need to have one. Now, I know that there are moves being made within the city of Pittsburgh to try and advance in the permitting space when someone goes to apply for a permit with accessibility needs on the inside of a property, where there would be a requirement that you can tell when I don't know exactly what I'm saying. So when they move to make those renovations on the inside, they're trying to make it so that they have to do the renovations on the outside first. Because what's the point of having an accessible restroom on the inside if the person who needs that can't get in the building? But yeah, if there's one point of access for someone who needs that assistance, then unfortunately that's where we are with the law right now. Retaliation covers every point that I've already made. So in employment, that looks like engaging in some kind of protected activity like, oh, you made a complaint to HR about the discrimination or harassment, or you participated in somebody else's investigation, maybe an internal investigation with human resources. You opposed any particular discrimination, like you caught somebody in the act and you said, hey man, stop it. And then an adverse action is taken against you. And we talk about these adverse actions in the way that they need to be material. It can't just be, oh, my boss just, rolls his eyes at me now because I had the audacity to stand up for someone. Or I can think more of the actual basis for retaliation. We see a lot of termination or discipline that occurs just after someone participating in a protected activity. You can request a reasonable accommodation. And if the person you're requesting it from decides, oh, you're too much trouble, and then they stop talking to you, if it's a housing situation, they just make the housing unavailable all of a sudden, that could be retaliatory. But we're looking for it to have both that causal connection, like you can tell that it was based on something that was done that would be considered a protected activity. And it has to have that temporal connection, because that's been challenged in the courts up and down about, oh, my brother filed a discrimination complaint 2 years ago with this employer, and then they hired me, and now they treat me like garbage. It's not close enough. Typically about a year is what we're looking at. So I'm going to get into the more specific disability focused information right now. Again, this is based on what we encounter at the commission. It's based on what's required to file a discrimination complaint and to move forward with that. I will never again purport to be an expert on any of this. And please, if you have any feedback or comment, just let us know, and I'm happy to incorporate those changes. So first off, what is a disability under the law? We're looking at a physical or mental impairment that affects one or more major life activities in some substantial way. And so I clarified what an impairment is: a condition or disease that has a negative effect on the mind or body. Substantial is to a great degree or for a long period of time. Permanent or for a great deal for a shorter time. And major life activities are literally any activity needed to carry on life: breathing, moving, getting to work, paying your bills, any of those sorts of things. And it really does encompass so many things. And so under the law, you have to have a disability that falls in these categories, or you have to have a record of having that disability, or you have to have been perceived by others as having a disability. I should mention that with all of the protected classes that we cover, they are all real or perceived. If you're a person who is darker complexioned and you're suspected to be someone from Mexico who maybe came here illegally and they treat you poorly or they refuse service, even if you're a native Pittsburgher, you can file on that national origin status. So we'll cover reasonable accommodation. I should probably first state that disability is the #1 protected status that we see complaints on within the commission, definitely with housing, and I believe it's tied for first with race in employment right now. And most of them are based on things like a reasonable accommodation request. And so this kind of accommodation is a change, exception, or adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service that may be necessary for a person with disabilities to have an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling, including the public spaces of a dwelling, so the housing space, not be excluded from or denied access to the goods, services, or facilities of a business. That's our public accommodation space. Or to perform the essential functions of their job. And I've got some examples of what these different things look like based on which categories we're looking at. In the housing space, an accommodation really stretches. If anyone is interested in a full range of disability and other kind of fair housing examples, please contact the Fair Housing Partnership. They are the real authority on housing and fair housing in the Pittsburgh space. But these kinds of things cover allowing an assistance animal in a dwelling that's meant for no pets, They can advertise it as no pets. An assistance animal is not a pet. Modifying the due date for rent based on someone's Social Security disability income, because you get those different times of the month and you want to make sure you can pay your rent. Asking for an additional bedroom because maybe you have a live-in assistance person, or you have extra medical equipment that you might need to store. An assigned parking space. These can be on a first come, first served basis, but if you have that handicap placard, that's really all you need to be able to go to a landlord and say, I need an accessible space. And then with credit and criminal history assessment, this happens a lot in the public housing space. So anything that's a HUD-owned property, Section 8. If they're looking at your credit history and there's damage to that because you were manic and bought up, the entirety of the Amazon front page and it damaged your credit, as long as you can show them that you're working through these manic episodes in a healthy way and that you're working towards that, they can grant you an exception to something like a credit score. Same thing for criminal history. If you had a schizophrenic episode and broke into a space because you were fleeing from something that was going to harm you, and you can address that charge when they come back with your background check and give them good reason for why that happened and point to your disability and say, this is why, that could also be an accommodation. When we're looking at employment, and this is, again, anything that's going to help you do the substantial functions of your job. So modified break schedule, if you need to take additional breaks or just modify it. That also works for religion, by the way, if you need to modify a break schedule to accommodate your prayer. Training. Something as simple as training, because maybe you didn't get that kind of training, or it would just really benefit you to ease some of your symptoms. A flexible work schedule or telework. Telework's a hot topic, but fortunately, telework has been shown to be a really valid accommodation for a lot of different people. And I should note on that point that telework is included in when we're looking at harm occurring within the city of Pittsburgh. If you're a person who teleworks and your home is in the city of Pittsburgh, but maybe your company is located in Ohio, still covered. Permitting a service animal in the workplace. This one, folks get all up in arms like, what if I have an allergy? Well, this is why we have an interactive process. I will elaborate. And then allowing meetings to be recorded. This gets a lot of people hot because there's a two-party consent law in Pennsylvania, but we're not talking about, private conversations necessarily. We're talking about meetings that maybe are not typically recorded, or maybe even a staff meeting that needs to be recorded so that you can review the content later because you're not very good at paying attention and writing the notes at the same time. I am guilty of this. And then with public accommodations, there are fewer accommodations that can actually be made. Things like communication flexibility, and that can be both for our folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, or for even people who speak a different language or don't speak, maybe they're limited English proficient. And then again, allowing a service animal to accompany its owner. They're only allowed to ask you certain things. What is this animal trained to do? Oh, I just blanked on the other one. I know someone can help me. Someone will put it in the chat. So the better thing with public accommodations is just to ensure accessibility from the get-go. Make sure that your aisles are large enough. Make sure your staff are trained to ask those questions for a service animal. How they can differentiate between a service animal and a support animal, because service animals are allowed in the public space and support are not. And then when we're talking about physical changes, that's where we have reasonable modifications. Literally a physical change to either an existing premise or where you are going to be. And this gives you equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling, so the housing space, and that does include public and common use areas, inclusion and access to the goods, services, or facilities of a business, or the ability to perform the essential functions of your job. Very similar, we're talking about more physical, tangible changes. And the number one question we get with modifications is who pays for it? And it depends. So in a housing situation where the housing provider receives federal funding, they are going to be on the hook for a modification cost, provided that it is not considered unreasonable, unnecessary, or too administratively or financially burdensome. With private business, it could be hit or miss. Employers, again, hit or miss depending on what it is. Most businesses are all too happy to get you an ergonomic keyboard or a standing desk because you need to have that accommodation. But in with private landlords or private employers, it can get fuzzy. Typically, a modification with a private landlord will be on the tenant to provide. So that, excuse me, that flashing smoke detector, instead of making a noise, that cost will be on you. You just have to get the approval from the landlord first to get it put in. Some other examples of modifications in housing are installing a ramp into the building. There's a lot of argument over whether this needs to be kept up or not, or taken down after a tenant leaves. And the overwhelming majority says, let's just leave it up because it makes it more accessible for everyone. Why would you take it down? Installing an automatic door button, that one happens a lot more frequently with our federally funded housing spaces. The example that I've seen was someone who uses a walker and had to use their walker, carry their laundry, and try to enter the door for the laundry room, and that was just not working out for them. And so they were able to make that request, and it really helped everybody, because who doesn't struggle carrying the laundry basket? Bathroom grab bars are probably the number one thing that we see. I will never forget the argument about antique tile, where it was just not feasible to have, it was not administratively or financially feasible for that landlord to allow grab bars to be put in because of their antique tile, even if it was a removable bar. They didn't win that argument. And then lowering kitchen counters. You know, we want that to be accessible for folks who are using a chair of some kind so that they can actually access those and not have to reach. In employment, this looks like a standing desk maybe, or other kinds of assistive technology, a specialized headset, or maybe even earplugs if they need some quiet. Reconfiguring a workspace layout so that you can actually maneuver a chair through. Noise canceling headphones, that one's coming up more often. I think we're all a bit overstimulated, and those open floor plans are not helping. And same thing with cubicle barriers. If you need a physical barrier to be, you know, secluded from someone else because you just can't focus, that can be a modification that works for you. The assistance animals came up a lot in what an accommodation could look like. We call them assistance animals because it does not matter what they're called. And this is in the housing space specifically, because this is where you can have all sorts of different types of assistance animals, and they are permitted. So they're not pets. It doesn't matter what you call it. It could, a comfort retriever, a support pet, whatever you want to call it. They're not pets, and they cannot be treated like pets. There should not be a pet deposit. There should not be a monthly pet fee. There are no breed restrictions. This one blows people's minds a little bit, because there are emotional support pigs. There are emotional support chickens. And there are good reasons. If there's a good reason for why that animal is a support animal and providing something for that person who's living in that space, then it should be permitted. We get the breed restrictions a lot with with dogs who look like pit bulls or cane corsos or Rottweilers, where the insurance company will put regulations on what is and is not permitted. It's not valid. And housing complaints can be made against insurance companies also. Could we go back for a sec? Thanks. So a prescription or a certificate is not the only thing that you need for an assistance animal. There are a lot of scammy websites out there that will be like, pay us $100 and we'll give you a certificate that says that your animal is a support animal. Please don't buy into that. If you have a provider, some kind of provider, a therapist, some kind of support network that can attest to the fact that you need this animal to have equal use and enjoyment of the housing space, that is what you need. A prescription saying just you could benefit from a random animal is not sufficient either. And I point out to people, the tenant still has responsibilities. Your responsibility as an animal owner, you still have that licensing requirement. If a dog needs a license, then you have to have it licensed. The immunizations need to be there. Like, they have to be inoculated in a lot of situations for a lot of different reasons. The health and safety of yourself and other tenants is really important. If you can always tell the difference between a true service animal and one that someone is lying and says is a service animal by how they're reacting in a public space. If they're going after another dog, probably not a service animal. Now, again, like, this includes support animals, which are not trained in the same way. So if they do pose a threat to other people, that's going to be a concern. It's a valid concern for landlords. The cleanup. You still got to clean up after your pet. This should be a given, but we have that fight a lot. If you have a dog that goes outside, you got to clean up after them. Again, health and safety for everybody involved. And then property damage. If your lease says that any damage to the property while you're under the lease will be covered by you or your security deposit at the time of move out, and you have a great support dog who has a chewing problem and chewed through your closet door, you're still liable for that. You can't just say, well, but it was a support dog, I can't pay. No, you're still covered by all the points of the lease that everyone else is covered by. So what is needed for an accommodation or modification request? I tell everyone it doesn't matter how it's communicated to whoever is receiving it, whether it's an employer or a housing provider. It can be verbal, it can be written, it can be an email or a text. I joke that it could be a carrier pigeon. Maybe that's your support animal, I don't know. But whoever receives that request has to address it. They either have to address it directly with you, or they have to escalate it to the person who can make decisions. They can't just put it down and say, well, I don't know what to do with it. It's not how it works. And so there has to be an interactive process between whoever's making the request and who you're making the request to. If you go to your employer and say, hey, I need to be able to bring my service animal in with me when I'm in the office, and they say, okay, but the person in the cubicle next to you is violently allergic to dogs, there needs to be an interaction there. How do we make this work? What can we do to accommodate? And if that means, changing the office layout a bit and moving somebody, maybe that's your fix. The point is, they have to be willing to work with you. There needs to be a conversation. A direct denial is always going to be a bad thing, because you need to at least be able to assess whether something is possible or if there's an alternative. And so you might, as a person who requests an accommodation or modification, have to provide documentation to back that up. If the disability you have is not readily visible, then you might have to provide documentation to show why what you're asking for is necessary. We're interested in the connection. What is the connection between your symptoms and the thing that you're requesting. How does the thing you're requesting alleviate symptoms so that you can fully use and enjoy your housing space, or so that you can perform the essential functions of your job? And so the documentation can come from a medical professional, some kind of peer counselor, a support group, a non-medical service agency, or a third party who's in a position to know about the person's disability. My coworker had a case where there was a veteran who was able to get testimony from um, his buddies that he hung out with about his need for a service animal, because they said he would turn into an absolute monster without his animal with him. But when he had his animal there, completely chill. Just great interactions with that guy at that point. And that was enough. That was enough to show the housing provider that that animal was needed. The Commission on Human Relations is a safe space. We all take a lot of time and effort in trying to make it a place where people feel comfortable to come and make complaints and feel a level of trust with us and confidentiality. We offer interpretation and translation at no cost. I know that on the federal level, English is now the official language of the United States, and there's no obligation to provide language services, but that's not happening in the city of Pittsburgh. We will continue to do that as long as we are humanly possible. We don't ask about or request any documentation about citizenship status, your immigration status, unless it's absolutely necessary for a citizenship and immigration status complaint. We're not asking. And if we get the information, it's not going anywhere. We don't report to anybody. The entire city of Pittsburgh at this point is not asking about citizenship or immigration status. We're here to serve you, regardless of what paperwork you have behind your door at home. You don't need an attorney to file with us. You can file by yourself. A lot of people do, because it's an option that is there for you as an administrative investigation. You can have an attorney if you want, and you can have a non-legal representative as well. So if you would prefer, because reliving the harassment that you endured is just too much, and you really just want to designate your partner as your non-legal representative, we have a form for that, and we will abide by that. We use the pronouns you want us to use. We have a preferred name field in our case management system, and we take it seriously. We're not here to misgender anyone or tell you how you should be living your life, because that's just wrong. We'll meet people virtually, in person, in our office, outside the office. It doesn't matter. We want folks to feel comfortable when they come to us. We know that our immigrant and refugee community is particularly hesitant to come into a city government building. So we will come out to them and do things like that. And since COVID, we've done a ton of virtual. So we're always willing to meet you where you're at, to accommodate when we can, and make sure that you're comfortable. Our process is completely free. This is not something you have to pay for. If you do have an attorney, that's a cost that you will incur. But to work with us and to have a free, neutral investigation, someone who collects facts about what happened and makes a determination based on our legal framework, whether discrimination happened or not, someone who will offer an unbiased mediation process so you can sit down with your employer and try to work it out, or even with your housing provider so that you can try to stay in your space and not get evicted because you're having an argument over whether a modification is possible or not. It's all free. Our staff are trained mediators. We have pro bono mediators that we work with, and we're currently working on finding a way to make our public hearing process a bit more equitable. Right now, it's very stacked that a respondent, so whoever is responding to a complaint of discrimination, has an attorney. That employer has an attorney, maybe they have 5 attorneys. The housing space, they have attorneys, especially if they're larger property management companies, they're coming fully loaded with many attorneys. And if you get to a public hearing and you don't have one because you're a complainant who came and said, hey, I just, wanted to try and fight this, we're trying to find a way, we're trying to find attorneys who are willing to come on board with us and represent these people so that they can have a fair shake at the public hearing stage. Because unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more public hearings and less employers and housing providers and public services that are willing to settle. It's not all about the money. I should point out that our settlements we try to include public interest relief in just about every one of them. And that looks like anything from offering training to whoever committed the discriminatory act, to reviewing their policies, to helping them create policies. It doesn't matter. We want to further the public interest, make sure that whatever happened doesn't happen again. And so we try to work those into our settlements. And like I said, we monitor those. So we try to make sure that within the year or two after that settlement that it's still happening and it's still current. What can you do? I mentioned already that we get a lot of individual complaints, and that if you are aware of someone who is uncomfortable with the idea of coming forward, or they're worried that their job is at risk, because who wants to try and find another job right now? Who wants to try and find another housing space right now? It's really difficult. The threat of retaliation is very real. But we've seen historically that people who see this illegal discrimination happening often get very tired of it very fast. One of the largest cases that we've ever settled was a housing case where an employee, a newer employee, found out about the ways they were discriminating against potential tenants and was a whistleblower. They came to us and they said, this is wrong. I can't do this. And it ended up with a $500,000 settlement to accommodate all of those people who had been harmed because of the codes that they were using on the applications. So if you hear something, say something, tell us. Just let us know that it's happening. If it's something systemic enough that we can take it as a case and do some investigation and collect some data, we will. Give them our contact information. If this information that I've shared tonight doesn't help you, it will help someone in your life at some point. I guarantee it. My family has never been more well informed of civil rights protections than they are right now. They are still very unwilling to come forward. I have immediate family members who have been harmed, and I'm like, this is a slam dunk case. Like, I don't say that very often, but if it's a case that would absolutely go probable cause because there's direct evidence, and they're too afraid to come forward, even when they know I'm working in this space and can tell them so. It's very real. A lot of people don't want to, and I get that. Really, you can remain anonymous through a lot of different complaints up until a point of public hearing, and then it's difficult to keep your identity private. Share the word, spread the word, tell people that the commission exists. We are a 70-year-old agency, but no one knows that we're here. We used to be 25 staff strong in the 90s, and we're down to 8. We're doing our best, but we don't have a dedicated outreach person. We are looking to add one, though. So if you feel so inclined to appear at a city council public comment session and let them know, I would not be opposed to that. We really want to be able to get out there and let people know how we can protect them. We want to talk to employers about a new protection before it becomes a problem for them. We would rather them have the tools they need to address things than to have to see complaint after complaint come across their desk and have to pay lawyers. We're not all about that. We want to be more proactive, and you can help us do that.
So, you said in the 90s you had 25 staff members. Do you see value in the numbers going up again? And if so, how many people do you think would be an improvement to the number you have now?
I will say that we are very lucky to have the staff that we have right now. There are a number of commissions that I've interacted with in the last couple of months that are having their staff cut left and right. Their budgets are being cut. Their ability to make even recommendations is being just destroyed. And so for us to have 8 people, 4 of them investigators, is a very, very nice thing. It is a very useful thing. I would ideally like to have a large enough staff so that I could divide and conquer. We look at our Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations for that because they have a community relations division that handles all the outreach, all the community tension, any intergroup relations issues, just anything that's public facing, you name it. And then they have an enforcement division, their compliance division, which is basically what we have right now. We have compliance. We have people who can investigate complaints. They do a damn good job of it. We're continuously training our people. And there are only 4 of them, but we're seeing the numbers go up. So, I mean, in the 90s, I think we were maybe 8 to 10 investigators strong. Getting back to that would be great. But I hope that we don't need that many investigators. I hope that we could add an outreach person or 2 and get ahead of any potential discriminatory issues and address the policies more actively, be able to keep on top of things in a way that we wouldn't need individual investigators to do these kind of complaints. I think having an investigator that focuses on systemic issues would be ideal. We used to have that position that would focus on like larger scale projects that involved a company maybe that has like a more systemic problem, and we would have to collect and analyze the data from that. But at this point, that's probably not in the cards for us. And I do not take it for granted that we are still the 8 people that we are, because it could go away tomorrow. On the screen is all of our contact information. We are located in the City County building downtown on Grant Street. We are on the 9th floor on the Ross Street side. Please remember that because the other side will take you to Allegheny County Human Resources and the Law Library. We get a lot of people knocking on our door looking for those. Our phone number is 412-255-2600. We have a hybrid staff because I believe in giving my staff the flexibility to live their lives. But we have people in the office 9 to 5 every day of the week. You can come in person, although we recommend you make an appointment because our investigators don't do on-the-spot intakes anymore. We would be able to meet with you briefly, hear some basics, and then get you scheduled, is what would happen with a walk-in. Our email is human.relations@pittsburghpa.gov. And that comes to multiple staff members. So if you ever have any questions or just want to know more information, want to get, a handful of our resources, we have handouts in I think we have some of them in up to 15 different languages because we want to be inclusive of the intersectionality that discrimination is, and the folks that need help being able to access what they need. They're all available online. Our website is pittsburghpa.gov/CHR. And you can always reach out to me directly. I'm not 100% on my email because I get bombarded, but I promise I will get back to you. My email is rachel.shepherd@pittsburghpa.gov. And for anyone listening who is even remotely interested in what it's like to be a commissioner or to join our team, I would be very grateful. We have been missing that specific voice of the disability community for a long time. And I would really like to get that perspective back on our team so that we can thoroughly address the issues. But there is a link here for our fact sheet, our commissioner fact sheet that tells you exactly what it entails to be a commissioner. And the application link for the Engage PGH page, where you can actually submit an application for any of the boards, authorities, and commissions of the City of Pittsburgh.
When I send the email out later tonight for the survey, I will include those links and I'll put those up on YouTube for anyone watching this after the fact. And now we have some questions. We have one question over here.
I wonder if you could say a little bit about what's the best way to get ready to bring a complaint to you? Or is the best thing to do just make an appointment and come talk to an investigator? Because I would imagine that a lot of the people listening have never filed a complaint before.
That's a great question. We tell everybody, wait, let me wait for you to. We tell everyone at the point of an intake where we're collecting information to make sure that your case is jurisdictional. So the who, what, where, when, does it fall under our laws, or can we refer you somewhere else? If you have all of that ready, if you have the address of where the discrimination actually occurred, whether that was a business or your house or where your employer's located, what have you, that's really beneficial because we can check that on the spot. If you know the date of the last date of harm or any other relevant dates that discrimination occurred, any documentation that you have, we tell anybody who is potentially experiencing discrimination, document everything. Your handwritten notes of today, like today's date, and landlord wouldn't return my text message for the last 2 weeks about X, that is going to be stronger than them coming and saying, well, I didn't have time. Document everything. If you're in an employment situation, save your emails, because if something happens and you lose access to them, and we can get them during investigation, but it helps us up front to know what we're dealing with and to how to help you build that complaint. Because you can bring a complaint to us, like you could write it up yourself if you wanted to, but what we do is we will do an intake with folks to ask them all the relevant questions. Who is involved? If you have first names, really beneficial. For a housing case, you have to have the name of a person to be able to identify. So if you know that it's a certain property management company, but you were working with a certain manager, their name is essential. Let me think what else. It's hard to come forward and to have this conversation. Our staff are trauma informed, and they do experience a lot of secondary trauma from the things that are brought to us. But please know that every single person on my staff cares, and they're here because they want to be, and they want to help take care of what's going on. And if there's any way that we can make it easier for you, if you need a support person to be with you, absolutely. Whatever you might need, please just don't be afraid to ask. But yeah, document everything. If you have evidence, put it to the side and make sure you keep it. Recordings, text messages, emails, photos, anything that you might have, anything that could be potentially show us what happened to you.
Okay, we have questions in Zoom. So Katie, I'll let you take over there.
All right, it looks like Debbie has a hand raised. We're going to go with you. Go right ahead.
Yes, a specific question about an issue that has recently come up that I've heard from several others firsthand experience, that apparently UPMC basically has closed down their adolescent trans care department for the most part, and that includes adults who are under 19, so the 18 to 19-year-olds who are legally adults. I didn't know if you've yet received any complaints yet. Certainly that's one thing, but if there's anything that you're doing proactively there, anything people specifically should do. They're probably not the only organizations doing this. But I do know specifically that UPMC has done this, and this was from somebody who's had a child who was about to get gender affirming care.
Yeah, thank you for your question. This actually came up last week at the LGBTQIA plus Commission town hall. I had a few folks inquiring about Children's Hospital and the denial of gender affirming care for minors. What I'll say is that we can take cases involving minors as long as there is a guardian willing to sign that complaint. If you have questions about something specific to your situation, or you know somebody who has a specific situation, please have them call us. It is public accommodations discrimination to deny a certain kind of care based on a protected status. So this is not something that we have seen yet, but it's coming. I've now heard this question in a few different forums, and it's coming. So please, if you're aware, may I ask, it was the entire department that was shut down, not just certain doctors denying that care?
That is their understanding, and they said that their surgeon called them and this again was an adult, but the parent of an 18-year-old, and the surgeon said that this was coming from above, and that they feel they are following new CMS guidelines proactively, even though those guidelines are very much in doubt in the courts and so forth.
Yeah.
But that it sounds like for the most part, other than possibly not taking people who are currently on hormones off because of the harm that might do, they are, and we can certainly, make sure they get your contact information. And Katie is actually even linking to a news article, probably possibly of this. They have posted made their Facebook post public as well about it. So I, I feel comfortable sharing, this much
No,
about
that's fine.
that this is going, and certainly they're encouraging people to file complaints with you, with Allegheny County, Human Relations Commission as well. But I don't know if Allegheny General has done this yet or not, but it's sounding like that it's largely they've tried to comply in advance and largely shut the entire department down.
Yeah, they wouldn't be doing that with other things, would they? They wouldn't say, no, you can't have your breast enhancement surgery. They wouldn't be saying this about other forms of care, right? It is absolutely discriminatory to be denying people, even youth, the access to the gender affirming care that they need. We're looking at it in terms of public accommodations, where if it's a hospital, typically when we see public accommodations discrimination from a hospital like that, it's like an administrative office, and they look at you and they assume your gender identity, and they say, oh, well, I'm going to need you to put your real gender on here before I serve you. That's pretty blatant. Or, something having to do with language services, where they're legally obligated to provide language services, but they say, if you can't speak English, I'm not taking you. So just leave. This is getting into a whole new realm of discrimination that we haven't seen, at least not in my decade that I've been with the commission. And we're here for it. We want to support everyone who is going through these things. So I always say, though, that every case is very unique. If each individual person is willing to come forward and give an explanation of what they've experienced, that helps us, because then we can tell if the facts align and it is something that's more systemic, then we can take that commission initiated case forward and try to address it on a larger scale. Our protections for gender identity and expression and sexual orientation are not going anywhere, by the way. That was what I shared last week with that crowd, was that despite what's going on the federal level, despite the mandates to start ignoring gender ideology and all of such nonsense, we're not going to stop doing that. We have the protections. We had them before the federal level had the protections with the Bostock decision in 2021, and we're not going to roll anything back. So the city of Pittsburgh will continue to protect against those kinds of discrimination. I do think that we're going to continue to see an uptick in businesses, particularly those who receive federal funding and have to make a decision about whether they want to continue receiving that federal funding. Looking at you, our larger scale educational facilities, they have to make a decision. Do we keep the T in LGBT, or do we get our grant money so that we can conduct research? It's a balancing act, and people are being made to choose, and they shouldn't have to. But please know, the city of Pittsburgh takes it very seriously. Mayor Gainey is taking it very seriously. And if you report it to us, we can do something about it.
Okay, we have one more question according to Katie, and then if you could give it a quick answer, we have just enough time for that, and then we will close out.
All right, Rita, go right ahead. Thank you.
I'm actually one of the investigators with Rachel, and I just wanted to couple on to that answer for gender affirming care. The biggest problem we're seeing is a question of, are hospitals shutting it down wholesale and no longer offering the service at all? Or are they discriminating against individuals in their care journey? And that's probably the biggest legal question that will play out in Pittsburgh. So we're all in it together, folks.
Thank you, Rita. So then,
She's our senior investigator, most senior investigator. They're all senior investigators at this point.
excellent. So I will come up again. If you can
Thank
go
you.
to our next slide. So thank you, everyone. Special thanks to Rachel for coming out and speaking tonight. Why don't take this off so you can understand me better. So thank you to Rachel for speaking tonight. Again, all the thanks go to my board, Debbie, Donna, Kendra, Monica, and Nyota. We've got Dean and Sean and Katie doing all of our tech stuff. Thank you again to Clean Air Tools Pittsburgh for the air filtration systems. Thank you to Disability Pride Pennsylvania for being our amazing fiscal agent. Thank you to the Three Rivers Community Foundation, whose grant is supporting this. I just want to let you know our next community lecture night is going to be on Monday, May 19th at 6 o'clock. It's another hybrid one, so we will have an in-person component or online. After that, I think they will be online only, but the topic is the Pitt Accessible Prosthetics Club reached out to us, and they're going to be telling us about the work that they do. It's a student-founded, student-run group. I'm so excited for it, and I'm so excited for them. So, that's going to be a great night. And then next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, we run on donations. Sign language interpreters are expensive, and we pay everyone a just and fair rate for all the work they do. We have a slide up right now. There are QR codes for our PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo. If you use any of those, please be sure to put AMP, A-M-P, in the payment section. If you go to our website, though, it's accessmobpittsburgh.org/donate. You'll have those QR codes again, but there'll be direct links to PayPal and Venmo to help us out. I think that's really it. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you to all the people who came in person. Thank you to our wonderful people who are here online tonight. If you have any other questions, are you okay if we share the slides?
Mm-hmm.
I will send the slides out, and that will give everyone, who needs to read through stuff again, a chance to do so. If you are watching this on YouTube and want the slides, if you email accessmobpittsburgh@gmail.com, we'll be able to get you a copy. And yeah, please email either Rachel at the email she gave or us at accessmobpittsburgh@gmail.com with any questions you have. And thank you. Woo! There's lots of happy applause happening in the room. So, Katie, will you let us know when we are out?
Thank you all for attending. I will be ending the meeting now. Have a wonderful night.